To God be the glory.
The Bible has a lot to say about guarding what comes out of our mouths. James 3 tells us the tongue can be used to bless others, but it can also be used to tear people down. James calls the tongue an unruly evil, full of deadly poison, because people fail to exercise self-control when it comes to their mouth. But for the Christian, if we're going to claim to be followers of Jesus, then our mouths must be without hypocrisy. To borrow from James, he says, out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Well, the book of Proverbs has a lot to say about this topic, and Solomon has a lot of wisdom to share when it comes to our mouth. He not only uses words like mouth, lips, conversation, speaking, answering, but he also references the actions of the mouth with words like bribe or boast, lie, deceive, scoff, slander, quarrel, flatter, whisper, and even vent. But it's not all negative, because he will also talk about us using our mouths to bless, to rejoice and praise, to counsel, to correct, to vow, and to encourage. And here's why this matters so much. Solomon tells us that our words are a reflection of what's in our hearts. Our words tell the true story of who we really are on the inside. A wise heart leads to wise speech, and a foolish heart is going to result in careless and destructive words. Solomon says that a wise person is going to be very intentional when they speak and responsible with how they use their mouth. Specifically, the mouth is supposed to be used to honor God and to build others up. If you haven't spent much time in the book of Proverbs, but this is starting to sound very familiar, that's because Jesus also told us to use our words and that those words reveal what's inside the heart. Jesus said, "For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth evil things. But I say to you that for every idle word men may speak, they will give an account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your word you will be condemned. So this is clearly an important topic. Jesus is saying that our words are important because they reveal who we truly are, but that we will also be judged by God for what we say. Solomon put it this way: death and life are in the power of the tongue. And so he says, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. He also says this: as in water face reflects face, so a man's heart reveals the man. Okay, so let's now dig into the book of Proverbs and find some wisdom for living on this topic. And the place I'd like to start is Proverbs 10:11. The mouth of the righteous is a well of life, but violence covers the mouth of the wicked. The reason we're starting here is because Solomon identifies two different kinds of mouths. There's the mouth of the righteous, and there's the mouth of the wicked. Each will lead to very different outcomes. So let's start with the mouth of the wicked. Just as Satan is often described as a liar and a deceiver, Solomon warns against using our mouth to deceive and to lie as well. Solomon says, put away from you a deceitful mouth, and put perverse lips far from you. Then he says this, 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are an abomination to him. A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift in running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among the brethren. Do you notice God hates lying? So Solomon plainly tells us not to lie, not to deceive. Now you might be asking yourself, why is this such a big deal? Why does God hate deception? I think there are probably several reasons, but first, I think one only needs to look back at history to see that lies and deception are destructive. Whether we're talking about Satan's lie to Eve, which led to the fall of humanity and separation from God, or some other deception used by Satan to pull humanity away from God. Second, lying and deception are distortions of reality, when we, as God's people, are supposed to love and promote truth. I can think of another reason. Lying and deceit is really an assault against a life of integrity, a life that is trustworthy. And so if you think about it, as Christians who carry the message of the gospel with our mouth and we praise God with our mouth, we cannot be people who speak without credibility. Solomon writes this, "There is one who speaks like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise promotes health. The truthful lip shall be established forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment. Deceit is in the heart of those who devise evil, but counselors of peace have joy. No grave trouble will overtake the righteous, but the wicked shall be filled with evil." Here it is, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal truthfully are his delight. Knowing that God delights in truth and that he hates falsehood should lead to us desiring the same. But I think there are also practical, everyday pitfalls that wait for someone who is a liar as well. Even society looks down on liars. I think you know that. You can lose a job for lying on your time card. You can go to jail for lying on your taxes. If you lie under oath in court, you can go to jail for that too. Solomon says a false witness will not go unpunished, but he who speaks lies shall perish. And then there's the fact that lying is a sign that you don't love the people you're lying to. Solomon says this, "A lying tongue hates those who are crushed by it." Something else you will find coming from the mouth of the wicked are words that tear down and destroy others. Wicked people say things like this, "Lie in wait for blood." You might remember that. Of course, you don't have to be talking about killing someone to do a lot of damage. Whether you're cursing or gossiping against your neighbor, fighting or slandering them, this is all very destructive. I remember as a child, we used to say, "Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me." That's just simply not true. Solomon says, "The hypocrite with his mouth destroys his neighbor." Listen to this. Fervent lips, or some translations say burning lips with a wicked heart, are like earthenware covered with silver dross. He who hates disguises it with his lips and lays up deceit within himself. When he speaks kindly, do not believe him, for there are 7 abominations in his heart. Though his hatred is covered by deceit, his wickedness will be revealed before the assembly. You know, some people are so vicious and destructive with their mouths. It might not be obvious at first as they try to hide their true feelings, their true intentions. But Solomon says it's just a matter of time before the true content of their heart is revealed. Solomon tells us there is a generation that curses its father and does not bless its mother. He goes on to say there is a generation whose teeth are like swords and whose fangs are like knives. Then he tells us this: a perverse man sows strife, and a whisperer separates the best of friends. A violent man entices his neighbor and leads him in a way that is not good. He winks with his eye to devise perverse things. He purses his lips and brings about evil. I want you to notice in this proverb the fact that the wicked mouth is even willing to harm friends and neighbors. I'll borrow again from the book of James. The Bible says there that the mouth can be like a fire that burns down an entire forest. Solomon has been making the point in this book of Proverbs that a wicked mouth will not only hurt others, but it will harm friends. It will harm your family, and ultimately it will destroy the individual themselves. Okay, so now let's pivot to the mouth of the righteous. The opposite action of hurting others, tearing them down with our words, is to help others with our words. So I'll ask you, are you using your words to help people, to build them up, to encourage people when they're struggling? Listen to these proverbs. Anxiety in the heart of man causes depression, but a good word makes it glad. Here's another one. A wholesome tongue is a tree of life. Here's another one. Pleasant words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the bones. If our hearts truly love others, then the words from our mouth will be evidence of that love. And while I would encourage you to look for opportunities to speak words of kindness and encouragement to people you come in contact with, I really want you to consider the way you talk to those closest to you. This, unfortunately, is where we often fail. We can be a great blessing for our spouse, for our children, and our friends, but often aren't they the ones who see the worst parts of us? We cannot go around saying nice things to people in the church and in our community, but fail in our own homes to build up the people that matter most to us. I'll confess, this is something I'm working on myself. It reminds me of the virtuous wife of Proverbs 31, the very last chapter of this book, as she is described this way: she opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. The mouth of the righteous person is also a mouth used with discretion. In other words, the mouth of the wise knows when to speak and when not to speak. Listen to these proverbs. Whoever guards his mouth and tongue keeps his soul from troubles. In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. How about this one? A fool vents all his feelings, but a wise man holds them back. He who guards his mouth preserves his life, but he who opens wide his lips shall have destruction. Solomon has a lot to say about this. Here's another one. He who has knowledge spares his words, and a man of understanding is of a calm spirit. Even a fool is counted wise when he holds his peace. When he shuts his lips, he is considered perceptive. Did you ever hear your mother say or tell you, if you can't say anything nice, then don't say anything at all? How often do we open our mouths and we say things that afterward we wish we had kept to ourselves? But it's not just about when to speak, is it? Or when not to speak. It's also important to consider how we speak to others. For example, Solomon says this, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." I can't tell you how many fights I've seen between children, between adults as well, that could have been avoided if one of the parties involved would have just used their words to de-escalate the situation instead of escalating it. People are often so filled with pride that they just can't seem to find a way to walk away or to hold their tongue to avoid the trouble. Again, it's the mouth that is revealing an internal problem, which in this case would be pride. Listen to what Solomon says. "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you also be like him. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes." This is another example that references how we should speak to others. On one hand, Solomon advises that we not waste our time or breath talking to a fool over foolish matters. In other words, don't lower yourself to their level. But on the other hand, Solomon is also saying that there are times when a fool needs to be put in his place. Only in this instance, we are not lowering ourselves to foolish talk, responding to foolish talk. Instead, a wise man may choose to share some wisdom with the fool to expose that folly. When we respond to others, even foolish people, evil people, we should not be lowering ourselves to their level. Rather, we should respond in a way that reflects who we are as God's people. There is a whole lot more in the book of Proverbs on this topic. But in all of the wisdom Solomon shares, we see a theme of being measured, being very intentional and thoughtful when we speak, because our words have great impact. I want to leave you with a few proverbs that make this clear. Solomon says, "A man has joy by the answer of his mouth, and a word spoken in due season, how good it is." Then he says, "There is gold and a multitude of rubies, but the lips of knowledge are a precious jewel." A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. We'll close with something Paul wrote in the New Testament that I think summarizes all of this perfectly. He said, "Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one." Thank you for joining us in this Practical Proverbs series. We'll see you next time.